What if Earth suddenly stopped spinning? Not gradually, not over millions of years, right now, in a single instant. In reality, this could never happen, but the physics behind it is very real. Right now, you're traveling at over 1,600 kilometers per hour along with the surface of this planet. You just don't feel it. The moment the ground beneath you stops, everything that isn't bolted to bedrock keeps moving. And what comes next is a chain of devastation most people have never even begun to consider. Every second of our lives is defined by a silent, blistering speed. At the equator, the solid crust of the Earth spins eastward at exactly 1,037 miles per hour. This massive kinetic energy is the invisible foundation of our global stability. We do not feel this movement because we, along with the oceans, the atmosphere, and every skyscraper, travel at the exact same velocity. It is a perfect, continuous equilibrium. But if the solid planet suddenly halts, that equilibrium shatters. The braking force is applied strictly to the bedrock. Because of the law of conservation of momentum, any mass not anchored directly to the deep crust continues traveling at its original speed. At the equator, this means humans, cars, trees, and buildings are instantly flung eastward at over 1,670 kilometers per hour. The devastation scales with geography. The rotational speed decreases as you move toward the poles, following the cosine of your latitude. In London, at 50 degrees north, the ground beneath the city stops, but the unsecured world above it launches forward at over 1,000 kilometers per hour. At the North and South poles, the movement drops to zero, escaping the initial impact. But across the rest of the planet, this sudden differential subjects every structure to lateral forces thousands of times greater than the strongest earthquakes. Foundations snap, concrete pulverizes. In less than a second, the surface of the civilized world is scraped clean. The divide between the stopped crust and the moving world is absolute. Bedrock, anchored deep within the mantle, bears the brunt of the planetary break, but anything not physically welded to this deep lithosphere is instantly sheared away. Soils, sediment layers, and the very ground cover of the continents rip loose from the underlying rock. As the crust halts, a massive subterranean shockwave, carrying the energy of a magnitude 10+ earthquake, ripples through the planet's interior. Primary and secondary seismic waves race through the mantle at over 8 kilometers per second, fracturing fault lines that have remained stable for eons. On the surface, the physical destruction escalates instantly. Engineered structures are designed to withstand vertical gravity and occasional lateral earthquake shaking of under 1 G. This planetary halt subjects them to accelerations of tens of thousands of G. Steel joints rupture. Reinforced concrete columns buckle and pulverize under lateral loads reaching billions of newtons, triggering immediate progressive pancake collapses of entire city blocks. Ductile high-rise systems, designed to sway a few meters during extreme storms, are violently sheared off at their foundations as the ground beneath them suddenly drops to zero velocity. Simultaneously, the stationary air mass generates a staggering dynamic pressure of over 1.3 bars against every remaining vertical surface, a blunt force atmospheric blast that levels forests and shatters reinforced concrete walls. In a fraction of a second, the built environment of humanity is reduced to a supersonic stream of pulverized debris, scraping the rocky face of the planet bare. The global ocean holds more than 1.3 billion cubic kilometers of water, a staggering mass of over 1.4 sextillion metric tons. When the solid crust of the planet grinds to a halt, this colossal fluid volume does not stop. Unlike a standard tsunami triggered by localized seafloor displacement, this event behaves as a basin-scale inertial slab. The entire volume of the world's oceans retains its eastward velocity, reaching 1,670 kilometers per hour at the equator. Frictional coupling at the seabed is instantly overwhelmed. The sea becomes a planet-sized moving mass sliding across a suddenly stationary lithosphere. Instead of a wave propagating through a liquid medium, the entire ocean mass moves as a single, cohesive unit, retaining its massive kinetic energy. As the abyssal basins halt beneath this moving liquid mountain, the sheer momentum translates into a relentless hydraulic surge of unprecedented scale. The oceans are physically displaced, clawing upward and outward, transforming the liquid boundaries of the continents into global zones of total inundation. In 1958, a localized landslide in Alaska's Lituya Bay, pushed water up a mountain face to a height of 1,720 feet, the tallest wave run-up ever recorded. That was the result of a single collapsing ridge. Now the momentum of entire ocean basins is unleashed at once, driving water walls that dwarf any disaster in human history. This planetary surge strikes different coasts with varying, yet universally lethal fury. For New York, sitting at 40 degrees north, the Atlantic Ocean transforms into a massive hydraulic battering ram, surging westward at over 1,200 kilometers per hour. The skyscrapers of Manhattan, already battered by supersonic winds, are overwhelmed as a towering wall of water sweeps over Long Island and submerges the entire metropolitan area under hundreds of meters of turbulent ocean. In Tokyo, the shallow waters of Tokyo Bay offer no protection. The Pacific Ocean climbs over coastal defenses, instantly swallowing the dense urban sprawl of Shibuya and Yokohama under a crushing, fast-moving marine deluge. Across the globe in London, the North Sea and the English Channel ignore their traditional boundaries. The Thames surges backward, drowning the historic city under a relentless, muddy rising tide that leaves only the tallest hills above the water. Near the equator, where the rotational speed was highest, the violence escalates. Rio de Janeiro is struck by an ocean moving at over 1,500 kilometers per hour, which violently collides with the steep coastal cliffs, sending catastrophic spray miles inland and stripping the mountainsides bare. In Sydney, the iconic harbour bridge is shattered as a sheer mountain of water rushes in from the Tasman Sea, while in Dubai, the shallow Persian Gulf sloshes violently outward, instantly burying the coastal high-rises and the surrounding desert under a thick shroud of sea and silt. No coastline escapes. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, the margins of the civilized world are completely erased in a matter of minutes, as the oceans redraw the map of the Earth. Above the oceans, the global atmosphere carries its own massive momentum, decoupled from the solid crust. As the Earth grinds to a halt, this colossal air mass continues its eastward flight at over 1,600 kilometers per hour. This planetary wind shear instantly dwarfs any meteorological event in human history. The strongest Category 5 hurricanes, which top out around 300 kilometers per hour, are completely outclassed by this supersonic wall of air. At the equator, the rushing atmosphere generates a crushing dynamic pressure of 1.3 bars. It acts as a global abrasive, stripping topsoil from the bedrock, shredding entire forests, and pulverizing whatever structures manage to survive the initial shockwave. The sheer force of this atmospheric assault performs a mechanical flaying of the Earth. Any jagged ruin or mountain ridge left exposed now faces a continuous high-velocity sandblasting. The air, choked with billions of tons of debris, transforms into a global abrasive sheet. Over hours, this churning torrent grinds down the remaining bones of human engineering, stripping asphalt from highways and eroding structural steel down to its core anchors. The terrain is systematically flattened. Without vegetation or structures to disrupt the flow, the surface offers no friction to slow the atmospheric momentum. What remains is a barren, scarred bedrock, entirely devoid of organic matter. Soil systems that took millennia to form are gone, leaving behind a sterile expanse of polished stone. The very chemistry of the lower atmosphere alters, heavy with the dust of a vaporized civilization. The surface has become entirely hostile to life, leaving a dead lithosphere exposed to the harsh realities of a world that has ceased to turn. The violent winds eventually subside into a heavy, foreign silence. The chaotic destruction of the first hours gives way to a quiet, permanent division of the globe. Because the planet no longer rotates, the standard 24-hour cycle of sunrise and sunset is gone. One side of the Earth now faces the sun in perpetuity, locked in a relentless, baking noon. On this sunlit hemisphere, the ground absorbs continuous solar radiation, boiling any remaining moisture and baking the exposed rock into a cracked, superheated desert. Directly opposite, the other half of the planet turns away from the sun forever. This dark hemisphere enters a permanent frozen night, where temperatures plunge toward absolute zero, and the remaining atmosphere begins to condense into a thick layer of frost. Between these two dead extremes lies a narrow, circular border, a permanent twilight ring where the sun never rises or sets, but hangs forever on the horizon. Here, In a cold, eternal dusk, the temperature gradients generate a constant howling wind that blows across the boundary of light and dark. What remains of Earth is no longer a living world, but a dual-natured relic of stone and ice. This narrow ring of perpetual dusk, stretching 10 to 20 degrees in latitude along the terminator, is no longer a temporary shelter on a broken world. It is the defining geography of a new Earth. In this permanent transitional zone, the sun remains pinned to the horizon, casting shadows that stretch infinitely across a barren terrain. For any surviving biology, this cold corridor represents the only remaining sanctuary where liquids might exist without instantly boiling or freezing solid. But life here requires adjusting to an alien rhythm. The planetary wind system, driven by the massive temperature differential between the boiling dayside and the absolute zero of the night, constantly feeds cold air into this twilight band. It is a world of endless storms and unyielding gray skies, where existence is redefined by strict climatic boundaries. Without the centrifugal force of a constant spin, the planet's very geometry begins to warp. For billions of years, Earth's rotation has flung its midsection outward, creating an oblate spheroid with an equatorial bulge 21 kilometers thick. Now that mechanical support vanishes. Under the relentless, uncontested pull of gravity, the planet begins to settle into a more perfect sphere, initiating a monumental redistribution of land and sea. The oceans, no longer held at the equator by centrifugal acceleration, slowly migrate toward the poles where gravity is strongest. The global map is completely redrawn. At high latitudes, rising seas submerge vast swaths of Canada, Northern Europe, and Siberia, drowning them under thousands of meters of water. Conversely, around the equator, the ocean floor empties entirely. A massive, continuous band of exposed bedrock, deep-sea trenches, and newly elevated mountain ranges emerges from the receding waters, wrapping around the center of the planet like a dry, towering stone belt. The continents we once knew are gone, replaced by two giant polar oceans separated by a single, arid global supercontinent. Far beneath the newly dry equatorial crust, a quiet breakdown begins in the planet's interior. Earth's magnetic field is generated by the churning flow of molten iron in the outer core, structured by the planet's rotation. This spinning motion organizes the liquid metal into convective columns, creating the electrical currents of the geodynamo. Without rotation, this organized movement stalls. This shield does not vanish in an instant. Unlike the mechanical violence that scoured the surface in minutes, the collapse of the magnetosphere is a creeping decay spanning decades to centuries. As the currents in the outer core slowly wind down, the magnetic field steadily weakens. Year by year, the planet's defenses drop. Satellites in orbit lose their protective buffer, leaving communication systems exposed to cosmic radiation. Power grids on the ground face growing disruption from solar wind, while high-energy particles increasingly penetrate the lower atmosphere, raising radiation exposure across the surface. The invisible barrier that shielded terrestrial biology for billions of years is slowly dissolving. In this brutal geography, the question of human survival is not about reclaiming the planet, but enduring within its new, unforgiving margins. The narrow twilight corridor, where temperatures remain stable, becomes the last arena for life. Here, any future for civilization relies entirely on extreme self-sustaining engineering. Surviving communities must move beneath the surface, carving pressurized cities far into the bedrock to shield themselves from the unrelenting solar radiation and the howling terminator winds. These underground sanctuaries operate as closed-loop systems, where every drop of water is recycled and every breath of oxygen is mechanically filtered. Agriculture is completely decoupled from nature. Without seasons or a natural day-night cycle, food production shifts entirely to automated vertical farms. Stacked rows of LED grow beds, powered by vast fields of solar collectors positioned on the permanent dayside, provide the artificial light required to sustain fast-growing crops. On the frozen dark side, remote-controlled mining operations extract ancient glacial ice to supply fresh water to the settlements, while geothermal plants tap into the hot crust below to generate continuous electricity. But this engineered existence is profoundly fragile. A single mechanical failure in an air-scrubbing system, a solar flare penetrating the weakened magnetic shield, or a localized collapse of a subterranean food vault could end an entire colony. Human life is reduced to a series of technical maintenance tasks, dependent on a continuous, artificial life support system. In this silent world, there is no margin for error. Civilization survives not as masters of the planet, but as fragile tenants clinging to a narrow strip of stone. Right now, the ground beneath us is rushing eastward, a silent engine driving the rhythm of our lives. We exist in the grace of this constant, invisible motion, a force we never feel, yet one that preserves everything we love. It is a sobering reminder that the most fragile, vital parts of our survival are often the ones we never see. Join the conversation in the comments below.